All right. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to another episode of HRPOC Expert Series. This is our third episode. We're very excited about our first DE&I topic during this series. In February, Kim Jones came to us with metrics, methods, and madness and kicked us off with a bang. And then last month, Janice Dean did metrics part 2. How to wow the crowd. She did a phenomenal job. And so tonight we're going to be talking to you about socioeconomic and class status inclusion. So it's a different perspective to the DE&I phenomenon and all that. So we have an amazing speaker who's going to be coming to you from my home state of Arkansas, Jamala Wade Thomas. She's a SHRM SCP. She's an accomplished and senior certified human resources professional with over 17 years of HR experience. She's a veteran of the Arkansas Army National Guard and is currently the Human Resource Director for George Fisher Harville LLC, Little Rock, Arkansas, and the GF Piping Systems, a subsidiary of George Fisher Company, located in Switzerland. She's an alum of Webster University, class of 2004, where she received a Master's of Human Resource Management degree, and the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, class of 2000, where she received a Bachelor of Science degree in Agricultural Economics. She is the first and only African-American woman to serve on the Senior Executive Leadership Committee for George Fisher. And in her current role, she provides HR direction and leadership for manufacturing facilities in Arkansas, Pennsylvania, and California. She also works dually as the diversity lead and as HR project lead for the George Fisher Business Unit Americas on global HR projects and collaborations with George Fisher Europe, Asia, and Americas. She's very busy. She's been committed to using her professional knowledge to help disadvantaged community with soft skills, resume review, salary negotiation, interview, and networking skills so that they may be more marketable and have an inside advantage to workplace politics. Jamala is also committed to empowering young women and mentoring them to become future leaders. She's active in her community as a member of the Junior League of Little Rock, where she serves on the History and Archives Committee, and she's an active member of the Black HR Professionals Network in Little Rock, Arkansas, a big proponent of HRPOC. Jamala also served as a committee chair for the first George Fisher sponsored Walk for Water fundraiser and community walk in connection with Water Mission, which raised over $32,000 towards their global commitment to provide clean drinking water to third world countries and disaster areas. She's been recognized and honored as the 2016 Citizen of the Year by the City of Benton for her efforts in starting a town hall dialogue and community connection events between the African American residents and the Benton Police Department during the aftermath of the 2016 shootings of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile. Jamala resides in Benton with her husband, Mark, their daughters, Sydney, Erin, Gracie, and Tabor, bonus daughter, Daphne, and their two miniature schnauzers, her fur babies, she calls them. I want to give a special shout out before I turn it over to Jamala to Karen Lindsay Robinson, our behind the scenes guru who keeps us on track and makes sure that this goes off without a hitch. And then of course to our fearless leader, Crystal Brayboy, an amazing, amazing mind that put all of this together. So without further ado, let's welcome our expert speaker for tonight, Jamala Thomas.
Good evening, everybody. I am going to start my presentation. I want to make sure that everybody can see my screen. All right. Good evening, everybody. I want to thank you all for taking time out of your evening to listen to my presentation. I want to first preface it by saying I am not a diversity and inclusion expert at all. This is just something that is near and dear to my heart with poverty and social justice issues. And I've tried to just use my experience in HR to try to introduce these topics to our leadership teams since I have somewhat a seat at the table, I would say. So this presentation is kind of just like my research that I've done within the past few years and the locations that I've worked, and it's came about while I was kind of conducting some internal research on our employees, and I use this to introduce this topic to our leadership teams and our managers. So I wanted to preface that by saying that, because I know that there are probably hundreds of D&I experts, and I am nowhere near your level of expertise. I know just enough to be dangerous, but I wanted to use this opportunity to try to just use whatever influence I had to talk about this topic. How this came about for me was, and I worked in let me go back and say I work in manufacturing, so that's my industry. I've been in manufacturing probably about the last 11, 12 years of my HR career. And so one of the things, especially living in the South and living in the Bible Belt, so to speak, one of the things that I've come across is in the roles that we as HR professionals play, there's normally just a limited amount, one or two of us who get this seat at the table or are invited to discussions or are a part of discussions where we can offer our influence. And so often, especially when it's addressing sensitive topics such as race and gender somewhat, a lot of times I've found that the leadership teams, they will kind of shut down, especially hearing this come from a person of color, a woman of color. In all of my roles, I've been the only person of color in HR, the only person of color on management teams or leadership teams. And so as soon as I introduce this topic and I introduce it or segue the race or whatever diversity issue that we may have or we may need to focus on and address, I found that the leadership would sometimes kind of shut down and automatically become defensive, or we're not racist, or we're not misogynist, or we're not bigots. They just kind of take it the wrong way, and that line of communication is just automatically shut down. So when I was conducting some research with my benefits team, we were looking at, I think we were maybe pulling census reports for benefits and renewals. And we just so happened to look at our census for life insurance. This is how this all started. We looked at our census for life insurance, and I saw this huge gap of our company sponsored life insurance. I saw this, it was sad. Some of our employees barely had, $30,000 to $33,000. I mean, they barely had any. And it was just this enormous gap between our employees that we considered, our hourly employees or our general labor employees, all the way up to our senior leaders. It may have been a smaller gap between the senior leadership and middle management and lower management, but that gap between our entry-level employees or our floor employees, our production employees, it was just, it was sad. And so once I brought that up and once I introduced it, and oddly enough, the way it was sorted alphabetically, it just so happened that the majority of the employees that were visible were Caucasian employees or employees who were not minority employees. And so that jumped out on this to them. And it was like, okay, well, let's look at this. And so for maybe a year or so, I have been pressing, market surveys, everything. We need to really look at our compensation. We need to look at this wage gap that we have. And so by capturing their attention that way, a light bulb kind of went off. And I was like, okay, well, this is how I can introduce this topic and I need to go through the back door and introduce it. So that's a little bit of a backstory about how this presentation or how this topic came to be for me. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started with my slides, and here we go. So for us as leaders, the cultural representatives and gatekeepers and advocates who oftentimes have the direct influence, as I mentioned, and that coveted seat at the table, can we really use our influence to address the implicit biases that affect our marginalized employee groups by focusing on including the topic of the socioeconomic discrimination in the workplace as a topic of diversity and inclusion? And, for us, what we know about diversity and inclusion, we know the cultural diversity, the racial, the religious, the ageism, the sex and gender, the sexual orientation and disability, what I like to call, the textbooks. I'm sure there's a lot more in-depth subcategories within that I do not have or may not have all of the knowledge of, but for us, what we see in our day-to-day, those of us who kind of have that dual role of just, maybe we're the HR manager, maybe we're the HR one, or we're the HR director, and our company doesn't have a diversity department, that duty lies on us to kind of keep this initiative in front of our leadership. And so these are the basics that we all know about. And when we look at socioeconomic status, one of the definitions that I pulled from the American Psychological Association stated that socioeconomic status, or SES, encompasses not just income, but also educational attainment, financial security, and the subjective perceptions of social statuses and social class. And so the socioeconomic status can encompass quality of life attributes, as well as the opportunities and the privileges that are afforded to our people within the society. And for us, the low, or just for society in general, the low socioeconomic status and its correlates, such as the low education, achievement, the poverty, and poor health, they ultimately affect our society, and that intersects and oftentimes affects our workplaces. I mean, we deal with these employees every day. If you work in those environments where you're not just dealing with the higher skilled or the educated or salary only, or just those positions where you do have a multiple demographic of employees. And so in manufacturing, in my field, we tend to have a larger demographic of those employees who would have that lower socioeconomic status. And, we also know that it's referred as classism, and it's a prejudice or discrimination based on social class, which includes our behaviors, our systems of policies and practices that are set up to benefit what's considered the upper class at expense of the lower class. And when you look at that from an HR perspective, I mean, it seems so hierarchical, or so like a caste system of sorts. And we would all shrug and say, no, we don't do that. We don't have the haves and the have-nots. But we know, those of us who are practitioners of color, we know how those microaggressions and those nuances seep into a lot of the attitudes of the people that manage employees in this demographic, or who work with employees. And so we get to see how that marginalization or those biases seep in and affect our employee base. It's also the grouping of individuals in a hierarchy based on wealth, income, education, occupation, and social network. And like I mentioned before, it oftentimes results in implicit bias, microaggressions, and it intersects with other discriminatory methodologies. So how does social economic status discrimination show up in the workplace? Again, as I mentioned, for those of us who are practitioners of color, we kind of have that fine-tuned fourth or fifth sense to it. We know it, we live it, and we can spot it just like that. And so in trying to deliver that message or open the eyes of those who are not practitioners of color, they sometimes they don't see how covertly and blanketly it shows up. And so for me in my working day, it's mainly segregating. I have to call to attention the FLSA statuses, the hourly versus salary people, the exempt versus non-exempt. I mean, for us, that's just a huge place where it's ripe with bias. So, our salary people, just because of their statuses, they're afforded a lot more flexibility on coming to work. They have longer lunch breaks, things like that. They're not what the clock is not watched. They have less oversight at times. So that's one way that it can creep in, especially when you have your demographic where your hourly workforce is larger marginalized employees, and your salaried is not. And so I don't know how many people here in the US use the white collar versus blue collar, but because I work for a European company, that is a term they use very heavily, the white collar versus blue collar. It drives me crazy. I hate it. So I've been pushing to kind of just like, can we stop using that and also use the direct versus indirect labor terminology? Those two, I'm like, can you think about what kind of message that sends to people who are in those roles, that it kind of diminishes their significance if they're already dealing with other traumas or other microaggressions or other things that we just deal with on a daily basis being people of color. You have your full-time versus your part-time and your temporary employees. So, that's another one, especially if you're a temporary workforce or your leased, we call them leased employees, or your contract labor, if it's, heavily, a Hispanic American population or Latin American population or Asian population or African American population, those employees too, that's another way that I've seen that kind of segregating or that classism that disproportionately affects that demographic of people, our office versus non-office staff, and then our corporate versus field locations. So those are just areas that people don't really think about, but they do show up. It does show up in that area, especially when you look at the education and the requirements and things like that. So how that separates and segregates our employees. So our poor or lower income employees, they oftentimes have less of an assigned retention value, especially I would say in manufacturing. And I've worked a little bit and dabbled in the healthcare industry. And so, you have those who require the less education. You could, get someone and train them on the job, but they carry more of that working and tribal knowledge than, sometimes the more affluent employee that kind of comes in and they're able to get the supervisor jobs and the manager's jobs. But those folks who are in that lower socioeconomic roles or the positions, they don't always get the value assignment, I like to call it, as those who are in higher level positions or deemed a little bit more affluent. And we all know that we have to, navigate through hiring decisions that are often made using biases such as the physical attributes, geographical redlining, minimum requirements that weed out or attract candidates based on socioeconomic status. And another thing, historically, we have studies upon studies and upon studies that can social justice. We have, voting, racial. We have medical. We have so many studies that have proven the association between race and poverty and the socioeconomic based discrimination that reinforces and perpetuates racial inequalities. But that also seeps into the workplace. It's again, the things that I mentioned before. This is how those studies tie in with just how those biases come in, and they're ingrained in some of our managers and our leaders, as how they interact or deal or have those biases of our employees that fit that demographic. And in order to address these, we as HR practitioners or HR leaders, we have to be smarter and have a comprehensive strategy for addressing that racial discrimination. And for me, what I'm learning is if I introduce this into it, it addresses that as well, because it already intersects. But again, sometimes the focus when you say diversity and inclusion, everybody automatically thinks of those the major topics of diversity. That's not just taught to HR, but just taught in almost every leadership class as well. And so, while the main focus of addressing those inequalities are tied to political and social justice initiatives, we HR leaders, we can be the gatekeepers of addressing the workplace classism inequalities. So let me give an example of a couple of real world, this was on a website that I was reading, and I have seen this happen. I could say probably almost for a while, it was almost daily in our recruiting efforts, especially in manufacturing and those places that have shift work. So we have a woman that's been rejected for many jobs because she can't afford a car. And this woman wrote that there's nothing like seeing an interviewer kind of purse their lips and jot down a note while their face screams low income, low class, do not hire. And, in the larger metropolitan cities and areas where transportation is diverse and you have the train, you have buses, you have just a really functional transportation system, most people probably don't think of that. But in a place like where we are in Little Rock, I can say specifically where I work is in the port area of Little Rock, and it's more industrial, but it is off the beaten path. And so, the city over the past couple of years has really done a good job of trying to get more bus routes. But I can remember a time when there was like maybe one or two buses that came through that area. And so when we would interview employees, and the first thing they would say is, well, no, I don't have a car, I have to ride the bus. People would just kind of, the managers would just, okay, well, all right, well, that's nice. Shift starts at this, your shift starts at this time, this time, this time. And of course, you can't change policies to fit, just a couple of individuals. But if you have a larger number or a substantial number of employees or candidates that are applying and they're using public transportation, let's think of ways that we can assist those employees. So maybe we do bus vouchers, or maybe we do some sort of reimbursement, but how can we encourage or buy in and not make those employees feel like, or those candidates feel like that they're not worthy, or they're, we're contributing to, some of their maybe self-esteem issues or their view of themselves, because once again, they've had another door slammed in their face because of their socioeconomic status. Another woman who couldn't afford to fix her missing teeth, she said she had plenty of legal secretarial experience, but she's been turned down because she didn't fit the image of the firm, which was a nice way of saying GTFO. And people feel that. When I worked once for an employer, and I remember just being astonished that a very higher level leader, would really judge candidates, by their looks. And if a person can't afford to, they don't take care of their hygiene, if they don't take care of their dental, how can I expect them to take care of my product? And that was another time that a light bulb's like, well, how do you expect when you're in an area where you set this manufacturing facility in an area where there's a lot of lower income families, and what do you expect when you're paying this dollar amount an hour? And, I've learned that some people are truly ignorant of this topic. And it's willful because Google is there. It's something that's talked about in so many other areas. And I feel like if you really want to know about it, it's really important to you, you'll do the work. But then I learned that I had to change my mind on that and just kind of make this a social issue for myself and keep putting it out there in front of people. But that we probably wouldn't be surprised. You probably wouldn't be surprised, but it happens a lot, especially in manufacturing and retail and things like that. And so people may say, or the managers may say, or the hiring officials may say, oh, but no, I don't discriminate hiring on race. I don't care what color you are. I just need you to come to work. Okay, so now let's shift that. When you start having more applicants that are not minorities that are applying for the jobs and they're dealing with the same issues, because again, we're in Little Rock. And so our area is not just poverty, just doesn't affect African Americans or other minorities. So we also have a lot of rural employees that live in rural areas that are also impacted. And so, okay, I'll tell you what, well, what about, these people? What about this employee? I see your eyes are lighting up. They don't have a car. Oh, so now we want to talk about what kind of transportation okay, all right, well, let's open the door. This is how I found out that I had to kind of backdoor this topic in and bring in the minority employees or those who are marginalized. And what's the area of focus for us in HR? So, for us, we have to keep this in front of them, the implicit biases when we're making the value of it, when we're making business cases. I can't tell you how many times when I'm working with, especially my group now, I think they're finally getting it over the past year. Like, we're having a very hard time, especially with COVID, with recruiting. I mean, we were competing against, the stimulus, the unemployment, extra money that they were getting, the funds, and then people getting paid to not come to work. The FFCRA. We were competing with a lot. And so then we have a couple of, Amazons are popping up. We have a couple of companies that were still popping up. And so when we started looking at budgeting or forecasting for headcount, it was, how are we going to implement better and more robust succession plannings and training plans? And how do we prepare this group of people that are already here? Why haven't we prepared a line of growth for them to segue into these roles that we now have open? So being able to kind of take that and segue it into succession planning and take some of those dollars that we were budgeting and pour it into training and investing in the employees that we already have, also opens the door for our employees who are in this lower socioeconomic group to kind of take advantage of those opportunities, and us really focusing on creating those opportunities. For me, the big thing is the policies and procedures. That was one of the main reasons why I jumped into HR this career, because I just cannot, I think it's just the social justice warrior in me. I can't stand the policies and procedures and how they're created in some places to, have that negative impact on marginalized employees, and especially, marginalized employees that deal with poverty. And so one of the things that I'm always pushing is, okay, are we really looking at our policies? Who are they impacting the most? When we're looking at turnover, not just looking at years of service, not just looking at, voluntary versus involuntary, male, female, race, let's add a component. How many people are we terminating that are in that lower socioeconomic group? How are we impacting them? If we already have a dried up talent pool, then why are we continuing to create policies that impact our local community because these people live closer to us and they pay taxes and they're paying into infrastructure and all of this stuff. So how are we impacting them? I mean, do we really have to be this rigid? Really? Can we not be this employer of choice, and can we not have a bit of flexibility, or are we just trying to rule with the iron fist because we're up here in this class and we're kind of looking down on them, because that's what it looks like and that's what it feels like, and it's really hurting us and not them, because they can go get another job. A lot of them have a hustle mentality. They're going to figure out how to make it. We're the ones sitting here stressing ourselves out, burning ourselves out, and losing all kind of control because it's more of them than it is of us. So let's kind of close that gap a little bit. Of course, compensation, like I mentioned before, our benefit disparities. I worked for one company that, once I pointed this out, our short-term disability, we ended up providing that for our employees, because it's once they go out, well, now they're losing insurance because they're on FMLA, and now they can't afford to maintain their insurance because, unbeknownst to you, or maybe you don't understand this, and when I say you, I'm talking to the managers, what's $12 a paycheck to you for short-term disability? That's a lot for somebody making $11, $10, $13, $14 an hour. And especially if you're male and you're African-American male, and the likelihood of you having child support and all these things coming out of your check, or you are dealing with financial issues and you have garnishments and things like this. So how is that helping our employees? Let's look at these areas here. Promotional opportunities. We have these folks that are coming in and they have worked for 5, 10, 15 years doing the same thing, but they know the company culture, they know the company values, they know their job, other people's job, they can tell you everything. Why are we continuing to create these job requirements that require a degree in all these years of experience? And we have people here, so why are we not looking at cultivating our own and creating opportunities for our own to get a bigger piece of the pie? Because the more they make, the more confident they feel, the more buy-in they feel, the more investment they have with the company. And so this is what we need to look at. Why are we not looking at it this way? Retention. Again, retaining those employees if they feel like they can have, and of course, you can't throw money at everything. We all know compensation, can't just throw money at everything, and it doesn't always keep people. But how are we retaining people in this group here, this subgroup? What are our policies? How are we interacting with them? Are we making them feel like, as a lot of employees will say it when they're ready to leave and they're upset, especially those that work 12, 13 hours. You just treated me like a slave, or you just treated me like, you just treated me like I don't matter. You just work. All you care about is what I can put out. Like, how are we really thinking about their quality of life? How are we thinking about their mental health? How are we trying to better their lives with what we can? And so when I started presenting that, and again, presenting that where it's not, because I'm fortunate that the area that I work in has a pretty good mix of our demographic. We have more African-American employees, but we also have a really good mix of, Caucasian, Asian, and our Latin employees. So, being able to kind of, and I won't lie, I've kind of manipulated it a little bit. If I want to put data in front of somebody, I will sort it to where maybe the first 5, 10 names they see is somebody that's not of color, that's not a marginalized employee, that grabs their attention. And so, in looking at that, or looking at that way of introducing it, I've had to kind of slick it up a little bit. And so inclusive programs, how are we creating programs that celebrate these employees or make them feel, are we mingling with them? Are we mentoring them? Are we looking at ways that we can introduce them to opportunities that will better them, or that also will better the company? Or are we just looking at they're just that group, they're disposable, they come in and do this, or, they're so nice. I love Miss Maria. She comes in, she cleans so well. Okay, well, what are we doing for Miss Maria? Because Miss Maria is about to have a heart attack over here because she works so hard. She got to work 3 jobs to be able to just make it, and she can't afford to get sick. So what are we doing to help her? Do we really care about Miss Maria? So, those types of conversations are a focus area. So is this truly a diversity inclusion issue? And while socioeconomic status intersects almost all of the current focuses of the D&I initiatives, it could be used more covertly as implicit bias while checking the boxes of addressing alternate D&I issues. So when I say that, I mean, yes, we hired, X amount of women. Yes, we are looking for people in the LGBTQI plus community. Yes, we're looking for more African Americans. We want to have the rainbow of employees. But are we looking at not just checking the box, or are we looking at really how we can have that gap to where we still affect those people who are in that lower socioeconomic group? So are we just kind of cherry picking? Are we just getting the right fruit? I mean, what are we doing? Are we really trying to look at this as an issue while we're employing this large demographic of employees? And if our current D&I initiatives are not enhancing the workplace culture and livelihoods of our affected employees, focusing on this area could be a key area of improvement. One thing I have found out in working with affluent leaders, especially those male or and white men, I don't know how far this video would get out. Everybody loves to be a philanthropist. Everybody loves to be able to, show how they're reaching down and pulling somebody up. And how do we, it sounds very manipulative, but it is by any means necessary, right? So how do we then use this as a door to also bring in and improve those areas that affect those marginalized groups of employees? Some of the inclusion initiatives recommendations, educate your leaders and address your obvious SDS disparities and policies, internal practices, cultural nuances, etc. Facilitate the interactive and situational trainings. I have been very fortunate a few times to go through a poverty simulation, and I have introduced it in the workplace, and it has opened the eyes of several people who just were like, I didn't realize this. I mean, I have some leaders that, they kind of came up through the ranks and they grew up and, they get it because that's how they came up, or they didn't come with a silver spoon. But then we have some that are so far removed that once they go through this program, it's like, is this what the average employee? Yes, this is what it's like to be a single mom whose kid is sick and the daycare calls and they still have to pay for daycare because their kid can't go to they can't go by the day. So they still have to pay the whole week of daycare. They still got to call in from work sick. You're still going to look at making them feel bad. And it's possible that they're going to get fired. Don't let them have 2 or 3 kids and one gets the pink eye, the stomach virus. Then she's got to stay off consecutively. Or, you have an employee. I use this example all the time. Every time, I don't know where most of you are from, but in Arkansas, all we have to do is have a weather forecast of like 5 snowflakes and the city shuts down. We shut down. And we have the ice and we never get snow. We always have the black ice. And I will have managers that are driving $40,000, $60,000 trucks souped up with these huge, lift kits. Well, I don't know why these employees can't get to work. And I was like, do you know how much it costs to pay your deductible if you slide off the road and wreck your car? And they're already barely making it. Like, no, they're not gonna risk their lives because they don't have any life insurance. They don't have workers' comp. Short-term disability. So they get injured. they're not going to get paid. And so now you're trying to make them feel bad because they won't drive to work in inclement weather. It's going to cost them more to take that risk to do that. So why don't we come up with a better inclement weather policy? Or why don't we come up with something that works for our people and not just be so production driven? I mean, I can kind of see on hospital caretaking positions that may or industries that may be a little different, but in manufacturing, it's like, okay, I understand we got to make a profit, but these folks are not coming to work. They are not going to risk their livelihood, and they're not going to risk. They already have a car they could probably barely afford, and they probably, a lot of them, because I've done it, get your new car, switch your, full coverage to liability, and no, I'm not going to drive my Dodge Charger to work on the ice. No, not going to do that. So those are just a couple of policies and things that I've had to bring to their attention. Creating programs that offer real solutions and improvements. With COVID, especially with folks having kids at home, I remember having a conversation, why do we have to work just this straight, rigid 7 to 7, 5 to 5, 6 to 6, whatever this 12-hour schedule? Why can't we change the way our work schedules so we can stagger them? So some people can stay at home with their kids, get them situated, then come to work, go out on the floor, be productive, come back. Like, why are we not creating solutions that help our employees, especially those, because the majority of them are going to more than likely be marginalized group of employees. Form an inclusion council. Let's get these folks, give them a seat at the table. Let's bring them in, have them a part of making decisions that affect them, that we can, and not all of them. Let's include them. They have a voice, they have an impact. Let's get them to kind of help insert their expertise into our best practices. And then, of course, listen to employees and advocate for their feedback, and then communicating the goals and of course, measuring the progress. So I'm going to wrap it up with the conclusion. Socioeconomic status-based discrimination is not really race neutral. Poverty is caused by racial discrimination, and discrimination based on the socioeconomic status reinforce the racial discrimination that causes poverty. It's just one big circle. And so if we're comprehensively addressing the racial discrimination, it's going to require us to address and look at the discrimination that we use for socioeconomic status that is sometimes covertly cloaked with the other discrimination. And many of our workplace policies that have been the subject of race-based disparate impact claims, I don't know why I couldn't get that out, it adversely impact our lower socioeconomic people of all races. So when we're creating those groups and that chasm or that gap, it just doesn't affect the communities of color. It also, affects, gender. And then, of course, people who are not in that marginalized group. So that is all. Oh, sorry, I have one more to go. When we, as HR leaders, when we advocate for those policies and the remedies and the benefits for our lower SES people, generally, it's normally not race specific. If we frame these claims in terms of racial disparities, oftentimes we obscure this fact. So like I mentioned earlier, when we start going in saying things like, if we look at how this is affecting this race of people and this race of people, it's like they shut down and they automatically get defensive. And well, I can say that's been my experiences. They get defensive, or they just kind of tune it out and, they don't look at it. But again, when you start showing how that affects their community as well, especially the lower income part of their community, and they have their own issues within their subset of hierarchy as well. But more than likely, if they had to choose between community that they represent and the community they do not, they will often lean towards the community that they represent. So how do we, circle back and include our community into that as well. Framing this advocacy in terms of the socioeconomic disparities, they tend to highlight that they all share common experience of marginalization, and they stand to benefit from the equitable practices. And then this approach could be a step towards building broader multiracial workplaces, focus on the economic inequality and also benefiting the marginalized employees of color in the process. Some of this is just a slide with some of the references that I pulled my information from. Again, this presentation is typically, I added a little bit more to it for this group, but typically this is what I use when I'm introducing this topic as a subtopic to our leadership group. I would encourage you, if you've not done it, look at the Crisis Assistance Ministry for the poverty simulations, or there's several out there. They could be done online, or they could be done in groups, but that's a good practice if you want, or good platform if you want to incorporate that discussion with your leaders as to how your policies and procedures and compensation and all of that encompasses how it affects your employees. Does anybody have any questions? This is the end of my presentation. I hope you all enjoyed it. And thank you again.
So we do have one question. Teresa says, I'm in manufacturing as well. We use direct and indirect also. Why do you like using those terms? She's saying.
Yeah. I mean, the direct and the indirect is not as they don't really care about that, but I literally hate that blue collar, white collar. To me, it's just so demeaning. If anybody wants to reach out to me, I could be reached at jamalathomas@hotmail.com. And then my LinkedIn profile is below, which I will also link it in the page. I would love to connect. If any of you listening are D&I experts, I would love to connect with you and pick your brain. I am looking to kind of get more experience in this and take this for my company introduce it more globally, because that's something that, again, people kind of struggle with feeling responsible, that they kind of shut it down. So reach out. I'd love to link up with you. And again, thank you.
Jamala, sharing your
screen. Oh, okay.
That so we can get the question.
Okay, do I need to get out of the presentation mode? You stop sharing. Did you say stop sharing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, I didn't even see your email.
Can you see that poverty simulation? I have to learn more about this. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. So there have been several poverty simulations, but one of the ones that I sat in was when I worked for a two-year university here, Pulaski Tech, and we got a lot of the instructors together, a lot of the leaders of the college, so that we can look at it from the student standpoint. And it was almost like a game. It's like a Monopoly game. It's you know how in high school they try to prepare the kids for adulthood, and you pull a card. And so that day you're, Jenny, divorced mom of 2 with an incarcerated ex-husband who has substance abuse issues, and you have one kid with autism, one kid with ADHD, and school's constantly calling you, those types of things. And so, you go around the group and each person has this scenario, and they have to kind of figure out how they're going to respond in real world. So if you're Jenny, with this situation, and you're that's your card, but you're the vice president, and you're making $200,000 or $300,000 a year. Do you really know? Can you relate? And it causes them to really kind of simulate and put themselves in that situation of what would you do? Because you can't think about how you would do it. Some of them will give you they'll give you guidelines. You can only do A, B, or C. Your boss is on you. If you're late one more time, you're going to get fired. Or, if you don't go to the school, they're going to call CPS. Like, what do you do in that situation? Do you call your mom that's on drugs to watch your kid. I mean, it's just all these issues that employees go through that sometimes the leaders, we give them those situations, and they have to figure out how they're going to react within the confines of situations or answers, or how they reply.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this great and timely presentation tonight. It's very important that we as HR professionals, that we're mindful of ways that we can help our employees advance and do our part to eliminate disparities. So this has been a great addition to our HRPOC expert series. Next month, Alicia Lambert is going to be coming to us and giving us some lessons in coaching. So we're really looking forward to that. May the 11th at 7:30 p.m. Don't forget to go to our website, hrpoc.org. Like us on Facebook and LinkedIn, and of course the YouTube channel as well. We're very excited to announce that July the 13th, Reggie Miller, the Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer for McDonald's, is going to close out this first part of our HRPOC episodes. So we are looking forward to that. So y'all come back, come see us. The slides for tonight's presentation will be put in the Facebook group so that you can kind of follow along with the discussion tonight to help you with that, to further your efforts in D&I initiatives. All right, thank you all so much. And until next time, have a great week.